1586. Women lined the castle walls with muskets, the only defenders left, as an army of thousands approached. Their commander was 19 years old, and she had inherited this clan as a child. Who was Tachibana Ginchiyo? In 1586, a teenage girl raised an army of women to defend her castle. 11 years earlier, an entire samurai clan had been placed in her hands at age 7. How does a little girl become a feudal lord? By the 1570s, the Otomo clan ruled much of northern Kyushu, and one of its fiercest generals was Tachibana Dosetsu, a one-legged commander said to have survived a lightning strike that killed his sword-bearer. Dosetsu had served the Otomo for decades, but he had no son to inherit his name, his castle, or his retainers. In samurai Japan, a clan without a male heir risked being absorbed or erased entirely. Dosetsu needed a solution, and in 1569, his only child was born. Her name was Ginchiyo. In 1575, Dosetsu made an extraordinary decision. Rather than adopt a son, he formally named his 7-year-old daughter Ginchiyo as his heir, sole ruler of the Tachibana clan and its castle. It was almost unheard of. Female heirs existed in samurai families, but rarely as the head of a fighting clan, with retainers, lands, and military obligations. The Otomo lord approved the succession, trusting that Dosetsu's reputation alone could make it work. From that day, Ginchiyo was trained not as a court lady, but as a future commander. Ginchiyo grew up surrounded by soldiers, not courtiers. She studied the management of a domain, taxation, retainers, supply lines, alongside the basics of command. Dosetsu, despite his age and his old battle wounds, personally oversaw her education, determined that his clan's name would not vanish with him. Other lords watched with curiosity, some with skepticism. Could a girl truly hold a fortress when the Shimazu clan, the most aggressive power in southern Kyushu, was steadily expanding northward? Dosetsu believed she could, but neither of them could have predicted how soon she would be tested. To strengthen the Tachibana line, Dosetsu arranged a marriage in 1581. Ginchiyo, now 12, would wed Muneshige, the talented son of another Otomo general, Takahashi Jun. Muneshige took the Tachibana name and became formally her husband. But Ginchiyo retained her position as head of the clan in her own right, an arrangement almost without precedent. The marriage was meant to combine two of the Otomo's most capable military families into one. On paper, it looked like the perfect alliance. In practice, two strong-willed leaders under one roof would soon create friction neither side fully anticipated. By the mid-1580s, the Shimazu clan had crushed rival after rival across Kyushu and was now driving into Otomo territory. In 1585, while leading troops against the advance, Tachibana Dosetsu died of illness in camp. The legendary commander gone, just as the greatest threat of his life arrived at the border. Ginchiyo, now 16, was the formal head of the Tachibana clan. Her husband, Muneshige, was away with the Otomo army, fighting to hold the line. Tachibana Castle, her responsibility, stood almost undefended, directly in the path of an advancing Shimazu army of tens of thousands.
With most able-bodied soldiers gone to the front, Ginchiyo turned to those left behind, the wives, daughters, and servants of the castle's garrison. According to Tachibana clan records, she organized dozens of women into an armed unit, training them to use matchlock muskets, weapons that required less physical strength than swords or spears, but could still kill at range. She positioned them along the walls, alongside the elderly and the wounded, to make the castle look more defended than it truly was. It was a desperate measure, but desperate measures were all Ginchiyo had, and the Shimazu army was already on the move. In the summer of 1586, the Shimazu offensive reached the Tachibana domain. Local accounts describe Ginchiyo's makeshift garrison, soldiers, servants, and her armed women, holding key positions as Shimazu forces probed the defenses. The castle did not fall. Whether through genuine resistance, clever bluffing, or simple Shimazu hesitation in the face of an unclear defense, the advance stalled long enough for Otomo reinforcements, and eventually allied troops under Toyotomi Hideyoshi to arrive in Kyushu. For a domain that should have been overrun, survival alone was a victory, achieved while its lord was a 19-year-old woman holding the line.
In 1587, Toyotomi Hideyoshi launched a massive invasion of Kyushu, crushing the Shimazu clan's ambitions for good. The Otomo and the Tachibana emerged on the winning side. Muneshige's military reputation soared. Hideyoshi personally praised him as one of the bravest commanders in Japan and granted him an independent domain at Yanagawa, worth over 100,000 bushels of rice. Ginchiyo, as head of the Tachibana clan herself, held formal status and land of her own, a rare arrangement that placed husband and wife as separate, recognized lords under the same roof. On paper, the Tachibana had never been more powerful.
But power did not bring harmony. Historical records describe a marriage under constant strain. Ginchiyo had been raised to command in her own right since childhood. Muneshige, a celebrated general in his own household, was unaccustomed to sharing authority with his wife, let alone deferring to her on matters of the clan that bore her family's name. Sources differ on the details, but multiple accounts agree that at some point the couple began living apart, each maintaining their own residence and retainers within Yanagawa domain. It was an unusual arrangement for a daimyo's household, but then again, almost nothing about Ginchiyo's life had been usual.
In 1600, Japan split into two armies ahead of the Battle of Sekigahara. Muneshige chose to fight for Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army, the side that lost. After Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu stripped the Tachibana of their domain at Yanagawa entirely. The clan that had survived the Shimazu invasion, that had been personally praised by Hideyoshi, now had nothing. No land, no castle, no income. Muneshige became a ronin, a lord without a domain, at the age of 32. Ginchiyo, living separately at her own residence, faced the same collapse, just as she had faced the Shimazu 14 years earlier.
The road to that defeat began months earlier, when Muneshige had to choose a side. Ishida Mitsunari, leading the Western Coalition, had long respected Muneshige's reputation as one of Kyushu's finest commanders, and appealed to him directly. Tokugawa Ieyasu's eastern faction was distant, and to many Western lords looked like an upstart challenge to Toyotomi authority rather than its legitimate successor. Muneshige sided with the Toyotomi name that had once rewarded him so generously. It was a decision rooted in loyalty and gratitude, and it would cost the Tachibana everything they had built since 1587.
Muneshige's own forces fought well in Kyushu, even after the main Western army collapsed at Sekigahara, holding out against Eastern-aligned neighbors for weeks. But with the Western cause already lost nationwide, continued resistance only delayed the inevitable. Eventually, Muneshige surrendered his castle and laid down his banners. The Tachibana name, carried by Ginchiyo since she was 7 years old and defended at the cost of her marriage's stability, was formally erased from the map of feudal domains. Both Ginchiyo and Muneshige, in their separate households, now faced a future with no land at all.
Ginchiyo spent her final years in modest circumstances near Yanagawa, supported by a small number of loyal retainers who refused to abandon her even after the clan's fall. In 1602, she died, by most accounts from illness, at the age of 33. She had never commanded an army in a decisive battle that won her fame across Japan, and she never saw her clan fully restored. By the standards of the great warlords of her era, her story might have ended as a footnote, a woman born into a role no one expected her to hold, who held it until she had nothing left to hold. Muneshige's story did not end with Sekigahara. Over the following years, he proved his value to the Tokugawa shogunate in campaigns against remaining Toyotomi loyalists. And in 1620, 18 years after Ginchiyo's death, the shogunate restored the Tachibana to Yanagawa, the same domain Hideyoshi had granted decades before. The clan that lost everything became one of the few in Japan to recover a former domain under a new regime. But the woman who had once held equal status as a lord in that very domain was not there to see it. Her name, however, had not been forgotten. Today, Tachibana Ginchiyo is remembered in the city of Yanagawa with a statue and an annual festival, and her story has become a touchstone for discussions of women's roles in samurai society. Some later accounts romanticized or exaggerated her military exploits. The image of an army of women with muskets has been both celebrated and questioned by historians. What is not disputed is the basic fact at the center of her life. A samurai clan facing extinction without a male heir placed its name, its lands, and ultimately its survival in the hands of a 7-year-old girl, and she held on to all of it for as long as she could. Ginchiyo's case was extreme, but not entirely unique. Across the Sengoku period, a handful of women, Tomoe Gozen generations earlier, or figures managing domains while husbands campaigned, stepped into roles official histories preferred to credit to men. What set Ginchiyo apart
was the formality of her position. Not a regent, not a stand-in, but the named, recognized head of a samurai house from childhood. Her life shows how flexible the rules of inheritance could become when survival was at stake, and how quickly that flexibility could be forgotten once the crisis passed and the conventional order reasserted itself.
In the end, Ginchiyo's life traced an arc rarely written about. Extraordinary power granted by circumstance, followed by an equally extraordinary erasure once that circumstance no longer applied. She inherited a clan no one expected her to inherit, defended a castle no one expected her to defend, and then watched her status quietly dissolve into her husband's larger story, only to be stripped from him too by a war neither of them started. Few warlords of the Sengoku era experienced both the height of formal authority and its complete collapse so directly.
Ginchiyo's story shows how far a single person could be pushed to the edges of power, and how completely they could be pushed back out again. But not every great warrior of this era rose through inheritance or marriage. Some fought their way into a lord's inner circle with nothing but raw skill and a temper that nearly got them killed before their career even began. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, the story of Maeda Toshiie, the spearmaster who challenged Nobunaga himself.
Tachibana Ginchiyo held a position almost no woman in samurai Japan ever held, not as an exception granted out of mercy, but as the formal head of a fighting clan, from the age of 7 until the day everything was taken away. If you enjoyed this story of inheritance, defiance, and a marriage that never quite worked, subscribe for new episodes of Samurai Chronicles every day. And tell us in the comments, should more women like Ginchiyo be remembered as warlords in their own right?